There comes a time in every life when the path ahead is unclear, when darkness seems to stretch beyond our understanding, and when doubt whispers that we have been left to walk alone. But it is precisely in those moments that we must remember this unshakable truth. God is leading you. He has not abandoned you. He has not forgotten you. Trust is not always easy, for we are creatures who long for certainty. We wish to see the full map before we take the first step. But God, in His infinite wisdom, does not lead with a floodlight revealing every turn. He leads with a lamp at our feet, showing just enough for the next step. Why? Because faith is not found in knowing the entire journey. It is found in taking one step at a time, trusting the guide who sees what we cannot. There is an unseen hand that guides, a presence that walks before us, making a way even when we cannot perceive it. God's guidance is not a fleeting notion or an abstract hope. It is a reality that governs the lives of those who trust in Him. From the beginning of time, God has been leading His people, not as a distant observer, but as an active and involved presence. Yet the challenge we often face is not whether He is leading, but whether we are willing to trust that He is. One of the greatest misconceptions about God's guidance is that it must always be evident, that His direction must come with clear signs, undeniable assurances, and immediate results. But that is rarely how He works. He leads not by giving us the full picture, but by revealing just enough for us to take the next step. This is not because He withholds information to test us, but because He desires faith to be our foundation. If we knew every detail of our journey, would we need to trust Him? If we could see the destination with absolute clarity, would we still rely on His wisdom? God's leading is often subtle, like the whispering wind rather than the roaring storm. It may come through a gentle nudge in our hearts, an opportunity that aligns too perfectly to be coincidence, or even the closing of a door that we desperately wish to walk through. At times, His guidance may come through hardship, redirecting us away from what we thought was best towards something far greater. This is where trust becomes vital. It is easy to believe in God's leading when the path is smooth, but true faith is forged when we follow Him despite our uncertainty. Consider the great figures of history who followed God's leading even when they could not see the full picture. Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. Moses was led into the wilderness before he ever saw the promised land. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before realizing that God had been leading him all along for a greater purpose. Their lives were not without struggle, but each step, even the painful ones, was guided by the unseen hand of God. We may long for miraculous signs, for an audible voice to confirm our every decision, but often God speaks in quieter ways. He leads through His word, through prayer, through the counsel of those who walk in wisdom, and through the circumstances that shape our journey. Sometimes the clearest evidence of His guidance is only seen in hindsight, when we look back and realize that He was orchestrating every moment, even when we felt lost. When you find yourself uncertain, when the road ahead is clouded in mystery, do not mistake the silence for absence. God is leading you, even when you cannot perceive it. Trust Him, not because you see every step, but because He does. He goes before you, making a way where there seems to be none, guiding you toward a future more beautiful than you can imagine. Faith is the anchor that holds us steady when the winds of doubt, fear, and uncertainty threaten to shake us. It is not merely a feeling or a fleeting belief, but a deep conviction that God is who He says He is, and that He will do what He has promised. Trusting in Him is not blind optimism or wisdom thinking. It is a firm reliance on His character, His wisdom, and His perfect plan. The challenge of faith is that it often requires us to walk forward without seeing the full picture. It demands confidence in something beyond what our eyes can perceive. This is where many struggle, for human nature craves certainty, tangible proof, and immediate results. But faith operates differently. It asks us to step forward, even when the ground beneath us seems uncertain. It calls us to believe that God is at work, even when our circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith is not tested in times of ease, but in moments of trial. When life is comfortable, it is easy to say we trust God. But when adversity comes, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors close, when the future appears uncertain, that is when true faith is revealed. Do we trust God only when He aligns with our expectations, or do we trust Him because we believe He is good, even when we cannot see how? Throughout history, those who walked in faith did so without having all the answers. Noah built an ark before a single drop of rain had fallen. Daniel trusted God in the face of a den of lions. The disciples followed Christ even when they did not fully understand His mission. None of them had the complete picture, yet they trusted the one who did. Their faith was not rooted in their ability to predict the outcome, but in their confidence that God was in control. Faith does not eliminate fear, but it overcomes it. Fear whispers that we are alone, that we are not strong enough, that failure is inevitable. Faith speaks a different truth. It reminds us that God is with us, that His strength is made perfect in our weakness, and that His plans for us are greater than we can comprehend. To trust God is to surrender the illusion of control and to rest in the assurance that His ways are higher than ours. Many hesitate to trust fully because they fear disappointment. They worry that if they place their faith in God, He may not come through in the way they expect. But true faith does not rest in a particular outcome. It rests in God Himself. Even when life does not go as planned, even when trials persist, faith holds firm in the belief that God is still at work, weaving a greater story than we can see in the present moment. When doubts arise and the path seems uncertain, hold fast to faith. Not because you understand every detail, but because you trust the one who does. Faith is the anchor that steadies us in the storm, the foundation that cannot be shaken, and the assurance that God is leading us even when we cannot yet see where. Trials are often misunderstood. Many believe that hardships are signs of divine disfavor, punishments for past mistakes, or evidence that God has abandoned them. Yet, throughout history and in the wisdom of Scripture, trials are not presented as punishment, but as a means of refinement. They are not obstacles meant to destroy us, but tools meant to shape us into who we were created to be. Difficulties in life are unavoidable. No one, no matter how righteous or faithful, is exempt from challenges. The difference lies in how we perceive and respond to them. When trials come, they present us with two choices: to see them as meaningless suffering or to recognize them as opportunities for growth. God, in His infinite wisdom, allows trials not as a cruel test, but as a means of strengthening our character, deepening our faith, and drawing us closer to Him. Consider a blacksmith refining a piece of metal. The metal is placed in the fire not to be destroyed, but to be purified and strengthened. The intense heat burns away impurities, making the metal more resilient. So it is with us. The hardships we endure refine us, revealing the areas of our lives that need transformation. They teach patience, endurance, and trust in God's plan, even when we cannot see the immediate benefit. One of the most challenging aspects of trials is that they rarely make sense in the moment. When we are in the midst of suffering, we often ask, "Why is this happening?" or "Where is God in this?" Yet the most profound lessons in life are often understood only in hindsight. Looking back, we see how difficulties prepared us, strengthened us, and led us to places we never would have reached otherwise. Many of the greatest blessings in life are preceded by struggles that seemed unbearable at the time. Trials also serve another purpose. They reveal where our trust truly lies. It is easy to say we have faith when everything is going well, but adversity exposes whether our faith is built on solid ground or on shifting sand. When everything is stripped away, when comforts are removed, and when plans fall apart, we are left with one essential question. Do we still trust God? Those who endure trials with faith emerge stronger, their relationship with God deepened, and their purpose made clearer. God does not take pleasure in our pain, nor does He abandon us in suffering. Instead, He walks with us through the fire, strengthening us as we endure. He does not always remove the storm, but He gives us the ability to withstand it. And in the end, we find that what once seemed like a burden was actually a tool used to shape us into the people we were meant to become. So when trials come, do not see them as punishment, see them as preparation. Trust that God is using even the hardest moments for your good, and know that He is with you every step of the way. Human understanding is limited. No matter how much knowledge we acquire, no matter how much wisdom we gain, our perspective will always be incomplete. We see life moment by moment, like someone looking through a narrow window, catching only glimpses of a much larger world. But God sees everything, past, present, and future, woven together in perfect harmony. He is not bound by time or constrained by human limitations. His wisdom surpasses all understanding, and His knowledge encompasses the full picture of our lives. This truth is both humbling and reassuring. It is humbling because it reminds us that we are not in control, that our plans, no matter how carefully crafted, are subject to His greater purpose. It is reassuring because it means that even when life feels chaotic, uncertain, or painful, God is not caught off guard. He knows the end from the beginning, and nothing happens outside of His sovereign will. One of the greatest challenges of faith is learning to trust God's wisdom over our own. We naturally seek understanding, wanting to know why things happen the way they do. When life unfolds according to our desires, trust comes easily. But when we face disappointments, losses, or unanswered questions, doubt creeps in. We wonder if God is truly leading us, if He has forgotten us, or if He is even listening at all. Yet in those moments we must remember that our perspective is limited. What seems like an obstacle may be protection. What appears to be a delay may be divine timing. What feels like an ending may actually be the beginning of something far greater than we imagined. Throughout history, countless stories illustrate this truth. Joseph, betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery, endured years of suffering before realizing that God had been orchestrating everything for a greater purpose. What seemed like misfortune was actually preparation for him to save an entire nation. The Israelites, even in the life of Christ, the greatest suffering, the crucifixion, seemed like defeat. Yet it was the very means by which salvation was brought to the world. These stories remind us that God's wisdom is beyond our comprehension. If we could see our lives from His perspective, every unanswered prayer, every closed door, and every detour would suddenly make sense. But faith does not require full understanding. It requires trust. It means believing that God is working all things together for good, even when we cannot yet see how. Instead of demanding answers, we must learn to rest in the truth that God's knowledge is perfect. He is not making mistakes. He is not indifferent to our struggles. He is guiding us with wisdom that far exceeds our own. When we release our need for control and trust in His infinite understanding, we find peace. We may not always see the full picture, but we can have confidence that the one who does is leading us with love and purpose. Waiting is one of the most difficult aspects of faith. In a world that values speed, efficiency, and immediate results, waiting can feel like wasted time. We live in an age where everything is at our fingertips: instant communication, fast solutions, and quick answers. Yet God's timing does not conform to human expectations. He does not rush, nor does He delay. His plans unfold according to His perfect wisdom, and when He asks us to wait, it is never without purpose. Many struggle with waiting because it feels like inactivity, as though nothing is happening. But waiting on God is not the same as doing nothing. It is a season of preparation, a time of refinement, and an opportunity to deepen our trust in Him. In the moments of waiting, God is often working in ways we cannot see, arranging circumstances, preparing hearts, and shaping us into the people we need to be for what lies ahead. Consider the farmer who plants seeds. He does not expect a harvest the next day. He waters, nurtures, and waits, trusting that in the right season the seeds will grow. The same principle applies to our lives. God plants dreams, callings, and purposes within us, but they take time to develop. If we rush the process, we risk uprooting something before it has fully matured. Growth happens in the unseen, beneath the surface, long before the fruit is visible. Throughout Scripture, waiting is a recurring theme. Abraham waited for decades to see God's promise of a son fulfilled. Joseph spent years in slavery and prison before stepping into his destiny. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness before reaching the promised land. Even Christ, though fully God, waited for the appointed time to begin His ministry. If waiting was necessary for them, why should we expect our journey to be any different? One of the greatest dangers of impatience is that it can lead us to take matters into our own hands. When we do not see immediate results, we are tempted to force outcomes, to create our own solutions, or to move ahead without God's direction. But this often leads to unnecessary struggles and consequences. True faith means trusting that God's timing is best, even when it does not align with our own desires. Waiting also reveals the true nature of our trust. Do we trust God only when He moves quickly, or do we trust Him even when He is silent? Waiting refines our faith, teaching us endurance, humility, and dependence on Him rather than on our own understanding. It shifts our focus from what we want to who God is. Waiting is never wasted. It is in the waiting that our character is shaped, our faith is strengthened, and our hearts are aligned with God's will. When the time is right, He will move, and we will see that every moment of waiting was part of His greater plan. Trust Him, even in the delay, for He is always at work. Obedience to God is one of the clearest demonstrations of trust. When He calls us to move, even when the way is unclear, our willingness to follow reveals the depth of our faith. Many desire to see the full picture before taking the first step, but God rarely operates that way. He leads step by step, not by showing us the entire journey at once, but by asking us to trust Him with each decision, each moment, and each opportunity He places before us. There is a misconception that obedience is easy when we have faith. In reality, obedience is often accompanied by uncertainty, discomfort, and even fear. God's plans frequently lead us beyond our comfort zones, requiring us to step into the unknown with nothing but faith as our guide. Yet every act of obedience opens the path forward, revealing more of His plan in His perfect timing. Consider the story of Peter walking on water. When Jesus called him, Peter did not have the assurance that he would not sink. He simply had the invitation to step out of the boat. It was only when he obeyed, when he took that first step, that he experienced the miraculous. But the moment he allowed doubt to overtake his faith, he began to sink. This illustrates an important truth. Obedience keeps us walking in God's strength, while hesitation rooted in fear can cause us to falter. Throughout Scripture, those who obeyed God without fully understanding His plan were the ones who experienced His power most deeply. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where God was leading him. Moses returned to Egypt despite his fear, trusting that God would make a way. The disciples followed Jesus, leaving behind their old lives with no guarantee of what lay ahead. In every case, obedience opened the door to God's greater purpose. One of the greatest challenges in obedience is that it often requires letting go of our own plans, our own understanding, and sometimes even our own desires. Human nature seeks control, but faith calls us to surrender. There will be times when God asks us to walk a path that does not make sense to us, to take a risk that seems unreasonable, or to wait when we would rather move forward. Yet, every time we choose obedience, we align ourselves with His perfect will. Obedience is not about blindly following rules. It is about trusting the heart of the one who leads us. It is about believing that His way is better than ours, even when we cannot see the immediate results. When we obey, we position ourselves to receive the blessings, growth, and purpose that God has prepared for us. When God calls, do not hesitate. When He asks you to step forward, do so in faith. Every act of obedience is a step toward His greater plan for your life. Even when the path is unclear, trust that He sees what you cannot, and know that obedience will always lead you exactly where you need to be. Hope is the natural fruit of faith. When we trust in God's leading, when we believe in His wisdom and His timing, hope becomes the foundation that sustains us. It is not a fragile wish or a vague optimism. It is the deep assurance that God is at work, that His promises are true, and that no matter how uncertain life may seem, there is a future secured by His hands. Many people struggle with hope because they tie it to immediate circumstances. They feel hopeful when life is going well, but when trials arise, hope begins to fade. However, true hope is not based on shifting circumstances. It is rooted in the unchanging character of God. He is faithful, and His plans for us are good, even when we cannot yet see their fulfillment. Hope allows us to look beyond the present moment, beyond hardship, beyond confusion, and trust that God is still writing the story. Hope does not deny reality. It does not ignore pain, dismiss struggles, or pretend that suffering does not exist. Rather, hope acknowledges the difficulties of life while holding fast to the truth that they are not the end of the story. The greatest examples of faith throughout history were men and women who endured hardship, yet their hope remained unshaken because they knew that God's purposes extended beyond what they could see. Consider the life of Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. By all appearances, his story seemed hopeless. Yet, through every trial, God was working. Years later, when Joseph stood in a position of power and was able to save many lives, he understood what had been hidden before, that every hardship had a purpose. Hope sustained him because he trusted in God's greater plan, even when he could not see it. Hope is also what allows us to endure waiting. When prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain closed, and when time stretches longer than expected, it is hope that keeps us moving forward. Waiting without hope leads to despair, but waiting with hope strengthens faith. It reminds us that God is never late, that delays are not denials, and that every moment of waiting is preparing us for something greater. One of the greatest gifts of hope is the peace it brings. When we place our trust in God, we no longer have to live in fear of the unknown. We do not have to be anxious about tomorrow, nor do we have to carry the burden of trying to control everything ourselves. Hope assures us that God's plans are better than our own, and that whatever comes, He is with us. So, do not let discouragement steal your hope. Do not allow circumstances to dictate your confidence in God's promises. Hold on to hope, not because life is always easy, but because God is always faithful. When we trust Him fully, hope flourishes, and we can walk forward with confidence, knowing that He is leading us into a future far greater than we can imagine.